Hello and welcome to this online lesson. I am Mr. Hoven, and today we will be looking at the tensions completely building up, boiling over, and the beginning of war. If you remember from last time, we looked at the two groups that kind of came together to form the new Republican Party, how the Democratic Party was starting to slip or split apart. We also looked at the impact of the congressional elections in 1854, showing how the nation is again splitting, that feeling of sectionalism. We looked at the presidential race of 1856. We talked about the Dred Scott case and that impact that it had between the North and the South, that Supreme Court case. We also looked at Lincoln and his first kind of run at a political office, or major political office, when he lost but gained much fame from that, to Stephen A. Douglas. And we finished up the last lesson with looking at John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. Again, these tensions are building and they're about to boil over. So looking at the election of 1860, the big question was, would the Union break up? Would the South secede? Or would they be able to maintain an uneasy feeling of cohesiveness and togetherness? The issue of slavery, again, split the Democratic Party further. The Northern Democrats nominated Stephen A. Douglas. They supported popular sovereignty. That means that in the West, people could decide on popular vote if they were going to have slavery or freedom in their territory. The Southern Democrats vowed to uphold slavery and help it expand, and their candidate was John C. Breckinridge. And moderates from North and the South, who formed the Constitutional Union Party, chose John Bell, and this party took no position really on slavery. The Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln. Their platform was slavery should be left undisturbed where it existed, so leave it alone where it already is, but it should be excluded from the territories. Many Southerners feared this, and that a Republican victory would encourage slave revolts. With the Democrats divided, Lincoln won a clear majority of the electoral votes, and the vote was purely along sectional lines. Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in most southern states, but he won every northern state. And in effect, more populous North outvoted the South. Again, the sectional divide is being shown. North for Lincoln, and the South was very much split up. And after the 1860 election, most Southerners did not trust the Republican Party. They felt that the Republican Party was only a matter of time before they started trying to ban slavery or encourage these slave revolts. So the Republicans promised not to disturb slavery where it existed, but Southerners didn't trust them. And on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina voted as the first state to secede or to break away from the Union. Compromise was attempted, so they tried to find a way to bring South Carolina back, but the Republicans rejected the idea of helping slavery expand or kind of leaving it alone. So, now we are at a crossroads. Will more states secede? What will happen next? And we will find out. And by February 1861, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia joined South Carolina and also seceded or broke away from the Union. On February 4th, the delegates from these states met and to form a new nation, calling themselves the Confederate States of America, and their president, Mr. Jefferson Davis. And the reasons that the southern states gave for seceding was basically that their individual state rights had been violated by the United States national government. They argued that they had voluntarily entered the Union, so that they voluntarily became part of the Union. They defined the Constitution as a contract among independent states. They believed that the national government violated that contract by refusing to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, where individuals who found or knew about fugitive slaves had to return them, and by denying the southern states equal rights in the territories. And as a result, they argued, the states had the right to leave this union. Many Southerners welcomed secession, ringing church bells and celebrating in the streets. However, others were alarmed. Robert E. Lee, who will come and play a big part in the Southern early victories and successes in the Civil War, wrote, "I only see that a fearful calamity is upon us." Some abolitionists preferred to allow the southern states to leave the Union. However, most Northerners wanted the Union must be preserved. So again, some mixed feelings on both sides about the South leaving. So, when Lincoln was about to take office, and that time leading up to it, a lot of people wondering, what would he do about the states that seceded? What would happen? So, to Virginia, in Kentucky, in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Missouri, and Arkansas, these are slave states still in the Union. Where would they go? Would they break away, or would they stay, with the Union? No one knew. And they were all looking for answers from the new president, Abraham Lincoln. And in his inaugural address, he spoke to these southern states that had already seceded. He stated that the must be able to keep the Union together. In his words, the union of these states is perpetual forever, and that he will work to keep the Union together at all costs. And the day after Lincoln took office, he received word that Confederate forces had already seized some U.S. forts within their states. Additionally, there was a message sent from the commander at Fort Sumter, a U.S. fort on an island guarding the Charleston harbor. The message warned that the fort was low on supplies and the Confederates demanded its surrender. Lincoln responded by sending a message to Governor Francis Pickens of South Carolina. He informed Pickens that he was sending an unarmed expedition with supplies to Fort Sumter. He promised that the Union forces would not throw in men, arms, or ammunition unless they were fired upon. The president then basically left the decision up to the Confederates whether there would be fighting or not. And Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, made a fateful choice. He ordered his forces to attack Fort Sumter before the Union supplies could arrive. Confederate guns opened fire early on April 12, 1861. Union captain witnessed the attack from the fort, saying showers of cannonballs and shells poured into the fort in one incessant stream, causing great flakes of masonry to fall in all directions. High seas kept the Union relief ships from reaching Fort Sumter, and on April 14, 1861, Fort Sumter surrendered. President Lincoln then issued a call for troops, and volunteers quickly signed up. Meanwhile, Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, along with Arkansas, voted to join the Confederacy, and the Civil War had begun. So now that the war had begun, for most states, choosing side in the Civil War was easy. However, the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri were bitterly divided. Slavery was legal in all of these 4 states, but though none had many enslaved people. And all 4 had ties to the North and the South. So again, you've got states that slavery is legal. They've got ties to both sides, so where do they go? They were vital to the North, the Union, because they were strategic. Missouri could control parts of the Mississippi River and major routes in the west. Kentucky controlled the Ohio River, and Delaware was close to Philadelphia. Maryland, though, was the most important border state because it was close to Richmond, the Confederate capital. And most significantly, Washington, D.C. lay within Maryland. If Maryland seceded, the North's government would be surrounded, and President Abraham Lincoln worked tirelessly to keep the 4 border states in the Union, and in the end, he was successful. So looking at the breakdown of each side, each one had specific examples of advantages and disadvantages. For example, the North had a larger population, better resources than the South. But the South had other advantages, such as an excellent military leaders and strong fighting spirit. And most of the war was fought in the South. The Confederacy knew the land and had the will to defend it. So just run down those one more time. The North, large population, more railroads, more manufacturing, higher amount of exported goods, and their goal, restore the Union, bring the Union back together. And in the South, they had better military commanders, stronger fighting spirit, knew the land, and their goal, become an established independent nation. So if you look at those two sides, it's kind of looking at us versus Great Britain. Who had more of a reason to fight? And it does seem like the South had a greater will to be independent than maybe the North did at bringing them back into the Union. So again, you've got this fighting spirit can have a large impact on the war. Now, in this war, the southern states had a few strategies. First, it was to conduct a defensive war. Wear out the North. You don't have to go in and advance and take a ton of their land. Just hold the land that you have, wear them out, and eventually they will give up. They just wanted to tire them out. And they wanted to attack and capture the capital of the Union, Washington, D.C. The northern strategies, again, they wanted to blockade southern ports so that no supplies could get in and no exports could get out. Gain control of the Mississippi River, the Anaconda Plan, where they kind of surround the South and squeeze the life out of it. And they also wanted to capture Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital. Now, just one thing to keep in mind, Lincoln's original aim was not to defeat slavery. He wanted to preserve the Union. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. We have covered, in the time we've spent today, tensions blowing over and the war begins. Looking at the election of 1860, secession of South Carolina and the rest of the Confederacy, the reasons for seceding, Lincoln taking office, the war beginning at Fort Sumter, the advantages of the North and South, along with their goals and strategies. I hope you've enjoyed this online lesson. Next time, we will be looking at the battles and the end of war. We'll see you then.